Similar to the multi-platform that we were talking about before, here's if you look at our NFL view, 56% of those NFL fantasy players are using 2 or more platforms every day of the week, which is a remarkable number. And it's every platform. It's not just that they're using the web more or just that they're using mobile more. They're more likely to view television every day, go online, use the mobile web, use radio, use print than just your typical NFL viewer. And through the beauty of the fact that if you want to play fantasy football on ESPN.com, you have to be a registered user. You have to create an account. We're able to aggregate a lot of data, so we work with our marketing team who runs what we at ESPN called our FRM department, which most other companies call their CRM department, we're fan relationship management. But because of that, we're able to look at this usage by user. And on Sundays, 90% of our fantasy players come to ESPN.com as opposed to about 50% of our non-fantasy players who are registered who are coming to ESPN. So again, this is the center of the bullseye. And through this FRM data, in which we run with Omniture data, we're able to understand usage patterns across the week. And this is a great aid in helping our editorial team know how to program, how to build content, and how to optimize the site to make sure that we're squeezing all the usage we can out of these people. So, for example, on Monday and Tuesday, all the green dots are heavier areas of usage, red dots are lighter areas of usage. It's all, for these fantasy players, it's all about what happened. So I'm looking at my team page, I'm looking at my league page, I'm checking scores, I'm checking stats. And on Monday, interestingly enough, they're heaviest users of the ESPN arcade because that's all little games and flash stuff because Monday sucks, and what better way to get through a Monday than playing video games when you're at work. So in the middle of the week, it's about analysis. So you're preparing for your game the next weekend, and about talking. So again, you're still going to your league site, but you're reading stories, you're looking at game previews, and you're going to message boards because a lot of times either you're talking smack with your upcoming opponent or you're asking advice. Who should I start? And then when it gets to the weekend, it's about the game. So I'm following scores, I'm checking my team page, and then I'm starting to prepare for the next week. So again, we can go back to our editorial team for ESPN.com and for the mobile site and tell them, look, here's the way that you should surface your content. Here's how you should place things on the site to make sure that this stuff is available to these hardcore consumers. And of course, as I mentioned, and you can't do a digital presentation without talking about social media. I think it's obligated. They don't let me leave the stage if I don't do that. So here's what fantasy and social have to do with each other. People are getting player updates from Twitter. But here's what I think is the most interesting thing, which is that little table at the bottom right, which is that through surveys and through a fan panel that we have, we ask people who use Twitter for fantasy football or who just use social networking in general for fantasy football, questions about the way they adopt technology, and they're much more likely to say that they're among the first of their friends and colleagues to try new products, new tech products, so they're early adopters. They're also people who help their friends and family make decisions about a product purchase. So these are influencers. These are people that marketers really want to reach. Certainly if you're a technology company, but really any company wants these people to be advocates for their brand. And they also talk. If you ever met anyone who plays fantasy football, they talk a lot about fantasy football and everything else. So we work with a company called Keller Fay that does word-of-mouth research. So we monitor the conversations, and as much as we talk about Facebook and Twitter, believe it or not, the majority of conversations still actually occur with, as Chris Tucker would say, words coming out of my mouth. It's not just online. So if you look at this here, if you look at the non-fantasy football audience versus the ESPN audience and ESPN fantasy football players, they're much more likely to have conversations about the brands that they see in NFL content, which is remarkable. And that's a huge multiplier effect for the advertising that those brands do. The fourth thing we learned is that multi-platform works. So I think we hear about this when you do advertising effectiveness and ad analytics at every conference you go to. It's better to use more platforms than less. And here we put actual quantifiable results behind that. If you look at all these measures of recall and brand favorability and the fit with the content type, purchase intent, anyone who's using TV and something else has much higher measures of that than someone who's an advertiser who's just using TV alone. And this is where we begin to have those conversations with advertisers that come to us, being a cross-media company, who spend a lot of money on Monday Night Football and Saturday Night College Football, saying, yeah, I'm spending millions of dollars on that. Why do I need to be on your website? Why do I need to be on your mobile app? And here we can say, because if you do, your ad's going to work that much harder. In fact, the more platforms you're on, the harder it works. So here's, the takeaway is every bar gets bigger. So if you're looking at something like likely to consider a product, the people who are using 4 or more platforms, who are exposed to your message on those 4 platforms, are much more likely to want to buy your product than those who are just exposed to the message on one platform. And the quote is really what sums it up. The more often I see it, the more familiar I am with it, and the more familiar I am, the more likely I will recall it later when I'm making a decision about what to purchase. So now we can go in and have a really robust conversation with a marketer about why they should be on these platforms. But the last piece of that is not just that it grows the more you add, it's how that works. So we work with a company called Point Logic to do a lot of sophisticated modeling. So in this case, we looked at a whole bunch of NFL sponsors last season and looked at all the different kinds of brand objectives that they might have, whether you want to drive awareness, recall, purchase consideration, and looked at all the different ways they could have advertised across the ESPN, television, online banner ads, taking over our ESPN.com homepage, video, et cetera, et cetera. And we found all those metrics where things really popped, where they really over-indexed. So we can go back to a marketer and say, look, we've convinced you that multi-platform works. How do you do it? Well, what's your objective? If your objective is brand awareness, not only should you be on television, but you should be heavily using ESPN.com. If your objective is purchase consideration, then you should really be using online video in our mobile web and mobile apps, because that's where we see those measures really leapfrog there. So it allows us to have a real educated conversation with our advertising partners. Fifth thing we learned are values of the ESPN gridiron. This is my favorite, and I take absolutely no credit for what I'm about to present. This is all the work of our director of ad analytics, Julie Proper. Here's the question we get. All right, I get it. You know, all these platforms work. You charge a premium for the NFL because we're ESPN and we charge a premium for everything that we do. Why am I spending so much money to be in the NFL? Particularly if you're a brand like McDonald's or Coke or something that's just ubiquitous, that advertises in everything. Why am I in the NFL? Why does that matter? Why shouldn't I just be an American Idol? Why shouldn't I just be online? Well, it's a really tough question to answer. Here's how we try to do it. We created what Julie called a brand without baggage. This doesn't exist. This is the High Five candy bar, as delicious as it looks. You can't actually go out and buy this. We made up a brand, and we wanted to see how exposure to ads for this brand and different kinds of content would drive people's awareness and potential to purchase this brand. So here's what we did. We worked with a company called Nina, who do simulated shopping experiences. So we got a huge bunch of people, and we gave them a task. Here's your virtual shopping cart. Please go down this virtual grocery store aisle and pick different things. So pick out ketchup, pick out hamburgers, pick out candy bars. And we put High Five in a mix of 3 other very well-known brands, may or may not be Hershey's or Snickers or things like that, and told them to go shop. Then we said, all right, thank you. Let's do another exercise. We'd like you to watch some content, some NFL content, some non-NFL content, just regular entertainment programming. We're going to show you some ads in that, and just do it. Just spend some time with this content, and we're going to slip in High Five commercials across these different. And now again, this doesn't exist. This is a controlled environment. And then, can you go shopping again and make your brand choices? And let's see what happens. So we're going to learn about the effects of multi-platform. We're going to learn about how different fandom affects how they would react to this advertising. And we're going to learn about the value of the ESPN environment, which is ultimately what we're trying to tease out. So here's what we did. We asked people then, all right, so here's your return shopping trip, your post-exposure trip. For people who were exposed to non-NFL, just any entertainment kind of TV content where we happen to slip in a High Five ad, the market share on that return shopping trip went up 113%. So this means advertising works. People actually were exposed to a message and they bought more of it, virtually. And when they exposed them to multi-platform content that also had the High Five ad in there, our market share went up 152%. The people who were exposed to that in NFL on ESPN programming, the market share went up 169%, and when they were exposed to multi-platform NFL content, the market share of the fictional High Five candy bar went up 213%, which is remarkable. We did the same thing looking at average fans versus avid fans. So the more avid fans who were exposed to either neutral content or NFL content were much more likely to virtually purchase the High Five candy bar on that return shopping trip. Here's the most remarkable thing about all that. Then we asked people about their trust of all the brands they shop for. There was a 56% increase in the statement of high five is a brand I trust. A brand that doesn't exist. A brand that you cannot go out and purchase. But just the simple fact that this brand was first advertised and then advertised in NFL content made people much more likely to trust it. Something they've never seen before. And presumably never eaten before, because it doesn't exist. Which now we begin to understand the value of this. And here's another real fun exercise that we went through with Nina, which was, so originally that pre-media and ad exposure market share was actually 12% of the candy bar category. And the people who took this, went through this exercise said that they would pay about 95 cents for the candy bar. So when we went through and then went through the exposure exercise and then the market share among everyone who were watching on non-sports programming, the market share went up to 29%. That's the growth that you saw earlier. But we also found that those people would pay up to $1.14 to maintain that 12% market share. So you can increase your price by 20%. For fans of football, you could get a 32% market share, or you could bump the price to $1.19. And for those who were avid fans, the market share grew to 35% post-exposure, or you could maintain that original 12% share and charge $1.24 or a 30% price increase. So these are pretty powerful conversations through ad analytics that we can go back to our marketing partners with and say, here's what the power of being in NFL content is on ESPN. And the last thing is creative. And this is something that I think for anyone who works in the media industry is near and dear to your heart. We try to provide this great environment for marketers to have great content and then have marketers have this great valuable audience to reach. And they often do it with really crappy ads. And it's hard to have that conversation with an ad agency because you're basically saying, hi, your baby's really ugly. So we try to have really constructive conversations with our advertising partners about this. But this is why it's so important and why creative has such an impact. So we did another exercise. We work with a company called Vision Critical. And this is kind of more programming and advertising and programming analytics. We did what we call an online dial test. So we let people watch parts of a documentary that we produced called The U, which is about Miami football. And then in it, there's content and there's ads. And the people who are watching it are able to push buttons online while they're watching to tell us if they are amused or annoyed or irritated or excited, right? So we ran 43 different TV ads through across 14 advertisers. We gave people the option to pick up to 25 different reactions, and then we did all the analysis off of that. But here's what we learned. We learned how you have to know your audience, that believe it or not, there is a difference between men and women when it comes to reaction to advertising. So from this online video that we were exposing people to, this is a measure of amusement. And as you see, men on the left were largely amused throughout the ad. Women were not so amused except for one point. This was a Miller beer ad. It was what you would expect a Miller beer ad to be. It was a goofy guy doing stupid stuff, which guys find hilarious. Women found it hilarious when the guy got hit in the head with something. Outside of that, not so much. But an important point to bring to an advertiser's attention about what kind of demographics they're looking for online or on a mobile device or on television. Again, the difference between men and women. So here's one that's interesting. This is for a retailer. Just the level of interest for men was pretty low. And women was a little higher until there was one particular point when they were very, very interested. And that was when this retailer, as part of their creative, mentioned that it was a holiday sale and they're opening at 5 a.m. tomorrow. People were really interested in receiving that message. And this one is my favorite. This is the difference between casual fans and avid fans exposed to a message here. If you looked at the top, the level of blue, amusement, and the level of red, annoyance, was basically the same throughout the ad. And it both spiked about 15 seconds into the ad. And we were thinking, well, that's odd. Why would people be both amused and annoyed at the exact same time? Well, we split it out into casual fans and avid fans. Well, the avid fans are on the right. They were really amused 15 seconds in. And the casual fans were really pissed off 15 seconds in. And it was because in that piece of creative, there was kind of an inside joke at that point that the sports fans got and were clearly amused by. And the more casual fans, they didn't like it at all. So again, having this more robust conversation using these ad analytics is really a powerful tool for us. And the final thing we learned from this is that you can create an ad with all these different motions in mind. So we learned through all these different ads that we analyzed that there's certain things that are much more appealing, and there's certain things that have higher recall. So amusing, entertaining, likable, happy, those are all very appealing. But things like annoying and pushy and irritating are all much more memorable. Not that you really want to go for that, but you want to strike that right balance. And what was interesting is that all these things in the middle, wholesome, authentic, informed, interested, innovative, which every marketer wants to extract from their creative, all kind of middle of the road. They're kind of appealing, they kind of have recall, not that much. But this is online video. We've done this exercise through mobile web ads, through television ads, through radio spots, and all these dots kind of move around a bit. So again, we'll be able to go back to a marketer and say, if you want to get, you want to do something funny, do it on television. If you want to get people to learn more about your product, do it online, because then you'll see things like you're interested in intelligent and innovative go much higher. And the final piece we learned, because we were doing this as an online video exercise, was about the whole concept of 15-second ads, which I know is something that we discuss a lot in my group about completion rates and pre-roll and mid-roll and how do you balance all that. Well, here's a case where we looked at a whole bunch of different advertisers and kind of normalized the data for those 15 seconds of the ad. And when you're looking at things like interest and being informed by the ad, many of them it takes until halfway through the ad for that even to ramp up. So what we go back and tell these marketers is that, look, if you can put a 15-second pre-roll on here, you've got to reach these people right away. This isn't television. You don't have time to get their interest. You've got to hook them within the first 2 seconds, or chances are they're not going to finish that ad. So that's what I had to talk about. The summary is real simple, is that we like to say that ESPN XP leads to exponential learnings. We also like to say that ESPN XP, you can't spell expensive without XP. So we understand how you have to follow the fan, or for most people's case, follow the consumer, understand how they're fitting that consumption into their life. We learned about being multiple. You have to ask multiple questions and work with multiple vendors to get those answers. Putting it all in the mix, you need to have very deliberate strategies about how you're achieving your goals, whether it's content or advertising. And really, for the analytics folks, it's about learning by doing. It's just going out and doing this stuff, throwing away what doesn't work, and keep going with what does. So thank you very much. Appreciate it.